Can you take us into that process? Like when you're like you worked on the pro side extensively. So when you're eyeing the back end of those rosters and also like considering like, okay, if we waive this guy, maybe this team will claim this guy. Like how much time is spent like that? Like you build lists of players you may like, and can you just maybe elaborate on how much is involved when you're looking at the other teams?
For sure. So you got really two lists. You're essentially boiling it down to guys you would claim to put on your 53 that would upgrade your 53. And then you're looking at guys that, you would want to add to your practice squad. Now, what's really difficult about the latter, if a guy gets cut, he does not get claimed. More than likely, he's going to go back to the team that he just, the team's practice squad that he just completed camp with. He's got the relationships with the coaches. He knows the offense. He knows the defense. It can be very difficult to get those guys to come over. So what you're looking for is, do you have a relationship with the player, with the agent? I remember in our 7 years in Chicago, this was Champ Kelly's territory. He had very good relationships with a lot of agents, and we would always kind of try to poach one or two guys that the original team, wanted the guy back for the practice squad, but we'd be able to sway him and, maybe pay him a little extra money, whatever you had to do to get him over. And then obviously the main list, though, guys that you would claim and add to your 53, because that, if you're bringing a guy in, that means you got to cut another guy. So those are the two primary lists. The process starts, in the summertime, building the bubble list, the back end list for each team. Some teams narrow it down. It might be 10, 15 guys that you're looking at. Some teams make it, a more, exhaustive list. It might be 35 guys that you're looking at. And you spread that out between mostly your pro scouts, maybe your scouting assistants, and then even your college scouts who are out on the road. Maybe you give them one team each. It's a collaborative effort. And then by the time we get to this third final preseason game, I would say that list is probably pretty small for them. Realistic guys that are going to get cut that could add value to the 53. There's a lot of communication going on constantly. Obviously, throughout camp, you're having personnel meetings, every 3 or 4 days to establish your 53 and then the next 16 guys for the practice squad. You try to get as much of the work out of the way before it's actually cut down day, because it happens so fast. And now with one cut, I mean, think about that. You're cutting down 90 to 53, 31 teams. The amount of names you have right there that you got to plow through. So you better be very organized on the front end, and your list better be pretty small. And then your GM, director of player personnel, assistant director of player personnel, they can't watch every single guy. So you better hand them a list that's manageable. In that target field should be pretty narrow. So you're not stressing those guys out as well. Cause the GM and assistant director of player personnel, they only have, so much time to grind through all that tape.
So kind of a two-part question here. You got coaches that some really value the preseason. It seems like it's then some that just don't. How, I guess part of the question is, what kind of mistakes can be made in scouting during the preseason when, everything can be very vanilla out there on the field, and maybe a guy looks really good, but you don't necessarily, it can be hard to see how much they're really being tested. And then how much did losing the fourth preseason game change things for you guys? Because obviously it's one less game to evaluate, but a lot of that game was, those back end roster guys.
Yeah. So the mistake could be made two ways. I could probably, narrow this down. Lack of information with regards to video. You want to make sure this player you're targeting, especially if it's a rookie who doesn't have previous NFL tape, there's got to be enough exposure where you really feel good about the player, because you can have one really good preseason game where you're playing 12 plays, and then maybe the guy doesn't play the next 2 weeks because of an injury, and 12 plays just isn't enough unless you really have conviction about this player from college. And this is why teams will purposely hold out guys and not play them in preseason games. If they know they're going to be guys they really want on the practice squad, they don't want to get them claimed if they expose them to the waivers. and they'll limit their reps. I've seen that over and over again in my 20 years. Well, they'll actually limit the reps to protect a guy to make sure that he doesn't get claimed. So like the mistake can be made if you don't have enough film. And the other thing that, you're just watching film, you might not necessarily know the character of the player. The character is so important. I've seen so many guys come into this league with plenty of talent to be good NFL football players that don't make it past year 2 or 3 because of their makeup. That could be their ability to handle adversity, the ability to push through when times are tough, their intelligence level, their football intelligence, whatever it is. Character can cause a guy to fail. So if you watch a guy for two preseason games and you love the tape, you also better know what you're getting. So a guy might get cut. How did he get cut? Those 3 preseason games were amazing. Why would they cut him? Well, there might be a story to that, and you better know that story, because one guy in a 53-man locker room can cause a lot of issues. So the mistake could be made on not enough film and not knowing who the player is, from a character standpoint. Those would be the 2 simplest answers I could give you.
Adam and I joke around about this a bit. Like we're fans at this time of year become extremely enamored with certain players, and they're like, you can't cut him. He's not going to clear waivers. Well, most of the time, 95% of the time, that player does clear waivers, and he's immediately added to the practice squad, just like we were talking about. But how different is it when it's a quarterback? I can't recall having this conversation about a quarterback like a Tyson Bagent, who undrafted guy, he's impressing the preseason, has even been better in certain practices. Is the quarterback different than that 5th or 6th safety? Maybe take us inside what those conversations would be like when you have a young, promising quarterback who's playing well in preseason games. Now everybody sees it, but you still have a PJ Walker that you may want to keep around. What would you do?
Yeah, I think, I'm guessing you already know the answer to this question. That is the premier position in football. If you have a quarterback in your building, I don't care if he's a 6th round pick, a college free agent, I don't care if you signed him on a 3-day rookie tryout. If you have conviction inside that building that this quarterback could be a potential backup for you and add value that way, maybe a long-term potential starter, you do not expose them to waivers. It's as simple as that. You can find room on a 53-man roster. Every GM's going to tell you, we brought in so much talent. This is going to be the hardest cut we've ever made. Every GM's going to tell you the same thing. The reality is those last few roster spots, they're very interchangeable players. Your wins and losses are coming from your first 30 players. They're not coming from your last 10. Those guys, they're interchangeable. Obviously, I don't want to minimize it. Every spot's important. But if you got a quarterback and you have conviction in the building that he has the processing post-snap to operate in this league, he has physical attributes. If he doesn't have outstanding physical talent, then it's got to be in between the ears. It's got to be the brain. If he's got playmaking ability with his legs and his arm, and what is he like in the building? Is he a leader? Is he 100% bought in? This is all he's about, because that's what you have to be if you're a quarterback in this league. If you have those intangible traits and you're showing on tape and in practice, you can move the ball down the field consistently, you do not expose them to waivers. In my opinion, it's as simple as that. So if Tyson Bagent is a guy that is doing what he did against the Colts consistently in practice, I'm not at practice. I don't know what it looks like. I don't know what they think about him as a person, but if you're excited about the person, you're excited about the practice. We've all seen what he can do in a preseason game. Trust me, there's no team has 53 players that they can't replace. Those back few roster spots, you make room for a quarterback.
So you're the rival scout now, and you turn on the film of that Colts game. What do you think of Tyson Bagent? What do you go back to the rival front office and say about this kid if you're a team that needs help at quarterback?
So obviously what we talked about a segment ago, reality for a quarterback I think there's 40 odd snaps in 2 games. It's not enough. I would keep the evaluation very simple, knowing that there's only 40 reps. I would tell the GM, I don't see any outstanding physical traits where he's going to be a high-level playmaker with his legs. I see basic NFL skill set as far as movement, size, talent, arm talent. And I see what I like the most. I see a guy post-snap that operates very quickly and efficiently. He knows where to get the ball, which is an extremely important asset and trait for a quarterback in this league. Fluid intelligence. It's easy to measure crystallized intelligence, a Wonderlic score, your IQ, grades in school. This position is all about fluid intelligence. Post-snap, in a messy, dirty pocket, you got bodies around you, you got safeties rotating, and being able to anticipate, see, process information on the move with bullets flying. Obviously, 40 snaps, I can't tell you this guy's got it, but in 40 snaps, I could say he's worth continuing to watch because he might have it. And it's exciting for them, especially when you get a guy undrafted that, at that position that you think's got a bright future. So I'm willing to bet without knowing that they're pretty fired up in Hallis Hall right now.
So that was interesting because your last 2 answers, one is if you're the Bears, you just don't expose the quarterback that you assuming they like him as much as, we think they might.
Sure.
You don't expose them to waivers. But on the other hand, it's not a for sure thing if you're on the other side that you would actually use a roster spot to claim them. Do you think just your knowledge of the league and how these things work, if Tyson Bagent were to be waived, that there would be at least one team that would be in a position to be like, well, let's take a chance on this guy because, we're pretty desperate at quarterback right now?
Would there be one team that is extremely interested in him? Absolutely. Obviously, you don't have the crystal ball. So that gets back to my original point. You just don't take the chance.
Yeah.
In my experience, watching those 2 games, and I'm just being rigorously honest here, I would not go to my GM and say, we got to claim this guy just based on those 2 games. He would be on a list to watch. Hey, let's track him, whatever practice squad he lands. That's in a vacuum. Now, that's not saying – that's with me not having any college history with this player too. Mm-hmm. It could be way different if I was the, scout that went to Shepherd College. I was pounding the table for this guy in April. We should have drafted him in the 7th round. We didn't get him as a free agent. Maybe it'd be a little different then. I'm just going off of 40 snaps. It's not enough for me personally to say, hey, I'm riding with this guy. Let's claim him if he gets cut. But I think from a 30,000 foot view, any team that is excited about a quarterback, you just don't take that chance because, like you said earlier, lose a potential high-end backup quarterback or a 6th safety or a 6th wide receiver. That to me, it's a pretty easy decision to make.
A couple more roster building questions before we get to some Justin Fields conversation. What's it like in those decision-making meetings where you have the coaches, the scouts, everybody has their favorites. These coaches have just spent weeks with these players. They might really like these young players. Maybe the scout,
the special teams guy like me, that's like, I need this guy.
Yes, and he's banging on the table. He's very loud about it. What are those conversations like? In who wins? At this point, are these conversations maybe more intense than the table banging that comes before the draft?
So the angle that you really just hit on is the emotion that goes into these final cuts. Because me sitting here right now evaluating 2 Bears preseason games, 40, 45 players that I can tell you for sure they're going to make the roster. Those last 10 roster spots, the last 5 roster spots, like I said earlier, very interchangeable. These decisions aren't going to impact wins and losses for the 2023 Chicago Bears. That's me from the outside looking in, but I also know what it's like being in there. a lot of emotion. You have ego and bias from the scouting staff on guys they drafted, and you don't want to cut guys you drafted. A guy you really pounded the table for as a college free agent, and he's close to making the team, and it gets emotional. You want him to make the team. On the coaching end, you have the special teams coach. He wants his 5 or 6 guys. He needs 2 or 3 bodies out of the linebacker and tight end room. He needs 2 or 3 bodies out of the receiver, DB, corner safety room. So you got that part of it. So like the 48-man roster versus the 53-man roster. Position coaches, they're with these players all day for weeks at a time. I think fans look at it as, hey, just cut him, just cut that guy, get this guy, cut that guy. Like, there's so much emotion, and like, these are human beings that have very close, tight relationships. If you're the tight end coach right now, and the 4th tight end's probably a position that's being talked about, is the 4th tight end good enough on 4th down, special teams, to warrant a 53-man roster spot? That's a very simple question. But then there's how close is the tight end coach to the 4th tight end? How hard is he pushing for him? And then you get into this room, and it is very emotional. I can remember several times being very upset over not getting the guy I wanted onto the 53, and now we got to wait for waivers to see if he gets to the practice squad. But I can also tell you this, in those 7 years, I can't really remember which players they were or who they were, which goes back to my original point of the significance of how important really are the 51, 52, and 53rd, guy on your team. So the reality inside the building is I talked about earlier, for the scouts and for the GM and the directors, you are tired, you're exhausted. I mean, I can remember driving from Hallis Hall right about this time in the middle of this grind, just almost being delirious. I've just watched so much tape from 8 a.m. to 10 p.m. and the only break that I got in the day was to go out and watch practice for a few hours. And I remember that felt like a vacation, like to go out in the sun and just be able to watch practice, and you're not just grinding tape, pouring way too much caffeine into your body. And driving home being all jittery and exhausted. Like, of course you're going to have passion, when you're fighting for your guy. So it gets intense. There's arguments. I can only speak to my experience with Ryan Pace. He did a great job of being in the middle, throwing a bone to the coaching staff here, throwing a bone to the college scouts or the pro department here, mediating both sides. And I promise you, every single year, all 7 years, within 48 hours of those arguments, fights, it's all forgotten, on to game one, and it's in the past. So it's a very interesting process. Probably a lot more emotion and ego and bias than there needs to be when you're really talking about the importance of those positions. But it's, I'm glad I'm a part of it. I'm glad I can talk about it now. And I think it's the same in every single building. There's so much work that goes into it. It's a process that people really, really care about.